Allow me to begin with an admittedly rather rough historical overview, which, given the short time available, will naturally contain abbreviations, omissions, and simplifications, for which I ask your indulgence. The early church's principle that only one bishop should have his, in modern terminology, canonical territory, that term was not used at that time, in each city can already be found in the apostolic constitutions, albeit not in the wording. It remains, at least in principle, valid for the following centuries of the first millennium. A second bishop in the same city or territory only exists, with a few exceptions, when he belongs to a different denomination. That means is considered to be a heretic or schismatic. Probably the most striking historical example of this is that, as a result of the disputes surrounding the Council of Chalcedon in 451, with the division between the non-Chalcedonian churches, especially the Syrians and Copts, and the Chalcedonian churches, which we regard to be the Orthodox churches, over the issue of the doctrine of the two natures of Christ. That led to the emergence of independent Coptic and Syrian churches, also not yet under that name. These churches, which were regarded as monophysites by the Chalcedonian, the Orthodox churches, claimed the legal continuation of the corresponding patriarchates of Alexandria and Antioch and their bishoprics, with the same titles and territories as the Orthodox ones. That exists up to the present day. For the Orthodox Church, however, the principle essentially remained valid well into the 19th century, especially as we are dealing with defined canonical territories, namely the old patriarchates of Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, as their traditional titles show. I give one example. The title of the letter is Patriarch of the Holy City of Jerusalem and all Palestine, Israel, Syria, beyond the Jordan River, Canaan in Galilee, and the Holy Zion. The other titles are very similar, also give a description of the area, the canonical territory they stand in front of. To them, to the old patriarchates, the Patriarchate of Moscow and the northern lands, Moscow, Rus, and northern lands, was added in 1589-92, whenever we date the full recognition, as well as temporarily also the autocephalous churches in the Balkans, namely the bishopric of Ohrid, originally called Archbishopric of Justiniana Prima and all Bulgaria, Archiepiscopi Disprotis Justinianis Kepasis Bulgarias, that existed from 1019 to 1767, and also the Serbian Patriarchate of Page, which existed from 1346 to 1463, and then again in the 16th century. All Orthodox Christians living in these canonical territories, and thus also the hierarchy responsible for them and their clergy, naturally belonged to the respective Orthodox churches, regardless of their language, culture, or nationality, insofar as we can use this modern term at all for the times mentioned. This was especially true for Constantinople, which was able to realize the claim of a global leadership role as an ecumenical patriarchate, which can be translated and should be translated as universal patriarchate or worldwide patriarchate. Interestingly enough, during the time of the so-called Turkocratia, that means in the Ottoman Empire, The Patriarch of Constantinople was established by the Sultan as the ethnarch, as the religious and political leader of the so-called Roman nation, Rum Millet, that means of all Eastern Orthodox believers in the Ottoman Empire. The internal situation of the Fana was certainly often precarious, as can be seen from the frequent changes to the patriarchal throne. After all, from 1595 till 1695, in the time of 100 years, there were a total of 54 different patriarchates, of only 25 holders who repeatedly replaced one another. There were patriarch, were deposed, came back, and so on. The most patriarchates in one person was then Kyrillos Lucaris, who managed to be 5 times patriarch. But under the Ottomans, Constantinople nevertheless succeeded in reducing even the holders of the old seats of the Pentarchy to de facto mere titular patriarchs of Alexandria and Antioch. Let's take Alexandria as an example. In 1517, Egypt became one of the provinces of the Ottoman Empire. The seat of the Patriarch was moved to Constantinople, which incidentally also distributed to the final consolidation of the Byzantine liturgy, the Byzantine type liturgy, in the liturgical praxis of the Church of Alexandria. The patriarchs often lived more or less completely in Constantinople during the period and visited their cathedra only from time to time for short stays. The Patriarchate of Alexandria lost de facto its independence and became dependent on the Patriarch of Constantinople, who, together with his synod, even appointed the Patriarch of Alexandria. The fate of the Patriarchate of Antioch is even more crucial because there the Constantinople dominance led to even a schism or the creation of the Uniate Church, of the Melkite Uniate Church, which was a result of the beginning of Arab nationalism, not yet complete nationalism, but Arab national feeling. And there we have already mentioned one of the main factors of the creation of parallel structures in the church. It is the emerging national consciousness of modern times. The example of Antioch already shows the beginning of a development towards parallel hierarchies, which has its root in modern national consciousness. Patriarch Anthimos of Jerusalem, who was in the 18th century, had already warned in his so-called fatherly doctrine of 1798, quote, the new French ideas, the ideas of the French Revolution, the new ideas would like to divide our church into nationalist churches. The one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church is to be divided into many, where it is no longer Christ, but the man of the nation who is to be at the center. End of quote. Thus, the erosion of the influence of Constantinople began in the 19th century with the independence of local churches following the formation of nation-states in the Balkans. Greece, 1833, Romania, 1865, Bulgaria, Serbia, and somewhat later in the 20th century, Albania. The development of the Bulgarian church is particularly noteworthy in this context. Resistance to the completely Greek metropolitans and the mostly Greek priests appointed by them began as early as the early 19th century. The so-called Bulgarian church struggle broke out as a result of the Bulgarian emancipation movement, the Bulgarian revival, as the Bulgarians call it, which had already begun in the 18th century, but was then finally victory in the 19th. A separate so-called Bulgarian exarchate was established in the Ottoman Empire following a decree by Sultan Abdulhamid II. It made possible for church services to be held in Slavonic or even Bulgarian, and for Bulgarians to occupy the bishoprics that had previously been administered almost exclusively by Greeks, the so-called Fanarioti, the people from the Fana. Fana, in this sense, not meaning the center of the Patriarchate, but the region in Constantinople where the population was almost, not completely, but overwhelmingly Greek, and where they came from. The regulation was now if 2/3 of the Orthodox inhabitants declared their support for the Bulgarian exarchate, the village was placed under the jurisdiction of the Bulgarian Church. However, as early as 1872, the Patriarch of Constantinople declared the Bulgarian Church to be schismatic and condemned the so-called ethnophilitism, a word that is used nowadays quite often. Let's look what the Declaration of 1872 says. What is ethnophilitism? It is, first, the consideration of believers only from one's own ethnic group, while at the same time separating them from the other Orthodox in the same region. The extension of the jurisdictional power of a patriarchate, an archbishopric, or a metropolis to only one ethnos, and, as a consequence, the parallel existence of several different national bishops in the same place. It is only logical that the Patriarchate of Constantinople strongly opposed and wanted to keep the old order. Everything has to be under Constantinople. All ethnic groups. In fact, over centuries, there was a dominance of the Greek, at least among the bishops. Almost all bishops on the Balkans were for a while Greeks, whether the faithful were mainly Bulgarian, Romanian, Serbian, or whatever. However, even already in the 19th century, the national idea was by no means unique to the Bulgarians. Just one other example, the Greek constitution of May 1827 states, quote, "Citizens of Hellas are all native Greeks who believe in Jesus Christ, those born abroad to a Hellenic father, those natives or foreigners or their descendants naturalized before the promulgation of the present constitution and born in foreign states who came to Greece and take the oath there." This can be understood as a stemming from the growing Hellenistic idea. Although at that time, numerous Romanian-speaking Vlachs and Albanians of the Orthodox faith lived in Greece. The second great factor for the parallel structures we have in our days is the migration. In the second half of the 19th century and further into the 20th century, the problem, which until then had limited to certain regions, such as the Balkans in particular, became a global one due to the waves of migration. First, primarily to North America, then to the Western Europe. Triggered by economic and political crisis, let's think of the situation of Slavonic population in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, mainly the Carpatho-Ruthenian areas, and certainly in 1915, the catastrophe of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Now, since the early 19th century, first the USA, as I said, became attracting Greek and then Slavonic migrants. One example, the number of parishes run by Greeks in the USA alone from less than half a dozen before 1891 rose to 1922 to 141. We will still come to another example. An example in Western Europe. Allow me to take as an example Germany, not only because I have been there involved in the Pan-Orthodox work was former General Secretary of the Bishops' Conference, but also because Germany is, among all the Western or Middle European countries, the one with the biggest Orthodox population. There are now, October 2024, probably 4.5 million Orthodox Christians, including the Ukrainian refugees that came since 22. That makes up to around 5% of the total population, which is more and more recognized also by the state. In this context, it is certainly significant that although many parishes have some ethnic native Germans among their members who found their way into Orthodoxy, sometimes through their spouses, but not infrequently also through their own religious development, there are only 5 relatively small official German-speaking parishes in Germany, and each of them comprises barely more than 100 believers. 99% of all the Orthodox Christians in Germany are immigrants, or at least of the last 50 years, mostly even the last 30 years. So there are only the first or maybe second generation that lives in the country. And they are spread now across 11 canonical dioceses of the respective autocephalous churches at home. There are at the moment currently exactly 540 Orthodox parishes in Germany, 540. The diocese with the largest number of parishes is the Romanian Metropoly of Germany, Central and Northern Europe, founded in 1993 with 170 parishes on the territory of Germany. They have still quite a few in Austria. Even more, namely 190, belong to the Russian Orthodox Church, but they are spread across 3 dioceses, namely the Diocese of Berlin and Germany of the Moscow Patriarchate, with 105 parishes, including 2 German-speaking and 1 Moldavian. The Russian Orthodox Church abroad, Rokor, with 77 parishes, and the Archdiocese of Orthodox Parishes of Russian tradition in Western Europe, of which we will hear in the next talk, with just 8. The Greek Orthodox metropolis of Germany of the Ecumenical Patriarchate is, so to say, in the middle, with 65 parishes. 7 of them are Romanian-speaking and 2 of German-speaking. The number of parishes in the most other Orthodox dioceses in Germany is significantly smaller, namely the Ukrainian Orthodox Eparchy of Western Europe under Constantinople with 30, the Antiochian Metropoly with 25, the Serbian with 27, 14 parishes in Germany belong to the Macedonian Orthodox Church Archdiocese of Ohrid, and then some Bulgarians, some Georgians. These Orthodox parishes, in the majority of dioceses, especially those which are rich in parishes, are now distributed fairly evenly throughout Germany, with a clear focus on major cities as Hamburg and so on. However, smaller and even more rural towns also now have mostly a Romanian, Russian, or Greek community, at least in their name. The vast majority of all these parishes are essentially homogeneous in national and ethnic terms, although it should be emphasized that the Russian parishes are clear exceptions in that they peacefully unite immigrants, believers, and clergy alike from all parts of the former Soviet Union and the canonical territory of the Moscow Patriarchate. That means ethnic Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Moldavians, Russian Germans, российские немцы из Kazakhstan и Sibiri, Jews, and many others. So, how do these parallel dioceses and parishes organize their common Orthodox witness and cooperation in the knowledge that all autocephalous local Orthodox churches around the world together form the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church? Various Orthodox meetings, above all the Fourth Pan-Orthodox Conference in Chambézy in 2009, has dealt with the problem of unity in the diaspora. This was taken up at the Holy and Great Synod of the Orthodox Church in Crete in 2016, which, however, as we all know, was in fact only Pan-Orthodox in name, because 4 of the then 14 autocephalous churches didn't attend. In numbers of the faithful, the biggest part wasn't presented. The Council presents the intention, I quote, "It is the common will of the most holy Orthodox churches to solve the problem of the Orthodox diaspora as quickly as possible and to organize the diaspora in accordance with Orthodox ecclesiology and canonical tradition and practice." Quote, finished. This is certainly a good intention, but the Council itself had to recognize that it is almost impossible to impose what they call the canonical order to maintain only the principle one bishop in one town. Professor Rade Kisic from the Faculty of Theology of the University of Belgrade stated already shortly after Crete, the founding of the bishops, quote, "the founding of bishops' conferences should be followed in the future by the proclamation of the autonomy or even autocephaly of new Orthodox churches. On the way here, however, all Orthodox churches will have to seriously come to terms with their national and ecclesiastical identities. The final solution of the Orthodox question, the diaspora question, can only be found when national identities recede in favor of a unified Orthodox identity. In the last 2 years, however, there have been clear strains in this regard, triggered above all by the claims of the Ecumenical Patriarchate to a primacy sine paribus, which manifested itself in the unilateral declaration of autocephaly by the Patriarchate of Constantinople for some groups in Ukraine, which had previously been universally regarded as schismatic, without the necessary consultation to change the situation. From the primacy, Constantinople thinks it has, sine paribus, it acted. This has not only had such a catastrophic effect on the ecclesiastical situation in Ukraine, which everyone here will be aware of, I just say Cherkasy, and not only on the current so often paralyzing confrontation in world orthodoxy, but also locally. The exclusive leadership role claimed by the Fanar and manifested, for example, through the appointment of the chairman of the bishops' conferences around the world, de facto. It says the president, the chairman, is always the highest hierarch according to the diptychs, which is Constantinople and the highest hierarch of Constantinople in the present place, has also an extremely negative effect on a productive, permanent Orthodox cooperation in Germany, and of course elsewhere. Its change is obviously a necessary condition for the further realization, intensification, and expansion of a permanent cooperation among the various dioceses and parishes, because this is only possible in the spirit of the synodality, of sobornos, as we say, in love and understanding for one another, and a clear renunciation of any striving for hegemony. It can only be lived fruitfully and beneficially in a genuinely synodical spirit, through a genuine pan-Orthodox spirit, on the basis of equal rights for all dioceses, each going its own way in loving union with the others and in mutual consideration. I come to the end. We have inherited the existence of parallel, generally nationally orientated church structures that have grown out of our history of migration. Above all, pastoral concern for the spiritual and emotional situation of the faithful demands this. The head of the currently largest Orthodox diocese in Germany, the Romanian Metropolitan Serafim Joante, has described this from his expertise and pastoral experience in his analysis of the current situation. I quote, "The greatest difficulty of solving this problem of the diaspora, according to the canons, lies in a natural reality, namely that the faithful of each jurisdiction are sentimentally and culturally attached to their churches of origin, which, however, have different liturgies and traditions. When we see the fragility of the faith of most of the faithful and their attachment to their mother church, it is impossible for a bishop or priest or pastor to pastor them if he does not share in everything the language and culture in which they grew up." End of quotation. A development extending over centuries with numerous historical factors, above all national consciousness and the migrations of the 19th and 20th century, has led to the fact that today we find in our time parallel Orthodox structures all over the world. Although this clearly contradicts the earlier church ideal of one bishop for one town, it should not be condemned outright, as the strong ties of the faithful to their native religious culture and their home churches contribute significantly to a clear strengthening of Orthodox identity and for a lively life of faith in the parishes. Violent changes and coercive measures from above, whether it's church authority or the state, can only have a devastating effect. Only when everyone has really arrived in their self-consciousness, meaning with the emotional bond to an orthodoxy grown together from many nations, then it will also be possible to develop the specific identity, and then can we speak of a unification in fixed forms of organization.
И подьякон Николай, слышите ли вы нас?